So a little bit of a history lesson about the Federal Reserve in order for us to get started here. So in the late 1800s, the United States had issues with its banking system. So there were bank runs. Bank runs were very, very common, and a bank actually failed almost every single day within the United States in the late 1800s. And during this time period, it sort of necessitated the need of a strong central bank that could basically oversee all the smaller banks that the United States had during this time period. And that's where the Federal Reserve System was sort of created. It's established by the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, and it created the Federal Reserve, which became the central bank of the United States, in order to maintain and oversee all the smaller commercial banks, just to make sure that the banking system did not fail. So here we take a look at the structure of the Federal Reserve and a few of the components. And the Federal Reserve is actually a very, very important tool for the economy because it has the tools of monetary policy to influence where the economy may be heading. So in terms of a few characteristics about the Federal Reserve and when it was created, we notice that the Federal Reserve is an independent central bank, meaning that its actions are not subject to the executive branch control. So basically the Federal Reserve is going to go ahead and do what they believe is best is in the best interest for the United States' economy. The executive branch, the judicial branch, the legislative branch, they cannot influence what the Federal Reserve is going to do when it comes to monetary policy. As much as the executive branch would like to control the Federal Reserve and the central bank, they really can't. They really don't have any power in that sort of case. So, a few news stories in the past, you might have heard about President Trump wanting to control the Federal Reserve and saying that the Federal Reserve is trash and terrible, meaning, and basically they're the ones that caused the economic crisis. Basically here, the Federal Reserve will basically just brush that off and say, hey, we do what is in the best interest for the U.S. economy based on the data that we have. Your sort of sayings and your sort of basically you trying to control us basically has no impact on us at all. The entire Federal Reserve System, however, is subject to oversight from Congress, so you're going to notice that a lot of people within the Federal Reserve, they do testify before Congress, before the senators, and also before the congressmen and congresswomen, just based upon a few different economic sort of things, and as well as where they believe where monetary policy is going to be heading. So here that happens every single month, that happens every single year. They just go ahead and talk a little bit about what they believe the Federal Reserve is going to do, and they detail everything to Congress. So take a look at the structure of the Fed, and the Fed actually has three parts to it. They have the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, they have the 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, and the Federal Open Market Committee. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at each one of these pieces and see which one's going to be the most important one that we spend the most time on. So here, take a look at the structure of the Federal Reserve. So structure of the Fed. And the structure of the Fed, the first piece, the first sort of category that we see right here are the Board of Governors. Board of Governors. Governors. And the Board of Governors are the people that you typically see on the news quite often. These are the people that are basically going to help the Fed carry out its responsibilities. So here, they help the Fed carry out its responsibilities. Carry out its responsibilities for monetary policy, as well as banking and credit regulation, credit regulation. So basically anything that deals with money, that's where the Board of Governors are going to go ahead and step in. So here, the Board of Governors are a very powerful group of people. They include 7 members. So 7 members. And basically these are the people that are the head of the Fed, and basically they're going to detail exactly where monetary policy is going to be heading, and it basically are the people that you do see on the news just sort of testifying before Congress, and they also do a lot of interviews as well. And these 7 members are appointed by the president. 7 members appointed by the president for 14-year terms. For 14-year terms. And you're going to notice that here, they are very long terms. Again, this gets into the neutrality of the Fed. And we have a secondary condition with these 7 members right here. They are staggered appointments. So staggered appointments. Staggered appointments meaning that, hey, one of these terms is going to expire every 2 years. So one term One term expires January 31st of every even numbered year. Of every even numbered year. And this is going to go ahead and say that, hey, the most that one president can sort of appoint to the Federal Reserve System is going to go ahead and be two people for one presidential term. So once again, the president can't really stack the Board of Governors with people in his or her favor with yes men or yes women. So basically, once again, we want to hit on the neutrality of the Federal Reserve System. And included within these 7 members is the chair of the Federal Reserve. So includes the chair. And the chair is probably the most important person within the entire Federal Reserve System. Basically, this is the person that oversees everything, and they are the ones that you see on the news most often. The current chair of the Federal Reserve, his name is Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell. And Jerome Powell has major influence in terms of where the monetary policy is heading within the United States. Here's a very nice picture of him, exactly what you would sort of expect from this current administration, a pretty old white guy. But Jerome Powell has done exactly what needs to be done in the best interest of the U.S. economy. Past chairs include Janet Yellen. So right here, Janet Yellen was the first female chair of the Federal Reserve. She also did a very nice job. Before her was Ben Bernanke, who basically oversaw the Federal Reserve during the Great Recession. Alan Greenspan, Paul Volcker, those are also names that you might have heard, and they were all previous chairs of the Federal Reserve. So with all of this, we have an idea of the first piece or the first structure of the Federal Reserve. Now we go ahead and turn our attention to the second portion, which are the Federal Reserve Banks. Federal Reserve Banks. And we'll get a little bit closer into detail about what the Federal Reserve Banks do, but essentially these are the 12 regional banks that we hit on previously. So 12 regional banks. And these 12 regional banks, they are located in large metropolitan areas and large metropolitan cities. You'll typically see this really nicely built building in a very downtown area of the city. And these are the Federal Reserve Banks. So if the smaller commercial banks want to hold deposits at the Federal Reserve Bank, this is exactly where they're going to be doing so. In Florida, we're in the Atlanta region, so if the banks in Florida want to go ahead and put deposits into the regional Fed Bank, they're going to do so at the Atlanta Regional Federal Reserve Bank. Finally, we take a look at the last component of the structure of the Fed, which is going to include the Federal Open Market Committee. Federal Open Market Committee. And the Federal Open Market Committee is probably the most important piece of the Federal Reserve System, because this is exactly how monetary policy is going to be conducted, because they oversee the open market operations. So oversees the open market operations. Open market operations. And open market operations is just a really fancy way of saying buying and selling of government bonds. Buying and selling of government bonds. Government bonds. And exactly these open market operations is how we do monetary policy within the United States. So as you can see right here, 3 components of the Federal Reserve structure. We have the Board of Governors. The people that you see on the news most often also includes the chair, the Federal Reserve Banks, and the Federal Open Market Committee. So as we wrap up this sort of section right here, we just want to get a closer detail into a few of these components. So these are the regional Federal Reserve districts. As we noted, there are 12 of them. In Florida, we are in the Atlanta region. So if we wanted to go ahead and if the commercial banks wanted to put money into the regional banks, they would do so in the Federal Bank and Atlanta. You notice that these are located in the large metropolitan areas. So Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Richmond. If you've ever been to these cities in the downtown area, you'll see these very nicely built buildings. What do the regional Fed banks do? They provide a nationwide payment system. They're the ones that distribute coin and currency. They regulate and supervise member banks, and they also serve as the banker of the U.S. Treasury. So things that we've already detailed before, nothing too in-depth that we need to talk about more with that. Also, in terms of distributing coins and currency, there are some unusual things about this. So if you go ahead and take a look at a few bills that you have in your purses or wallet, you're going to notice that, hey, there are specific letters that are attached to the serial numbers that you see right here. And where these letters show up on the bill tell us exactly where the bill was printed. So if you see letter B, you're going to notice that, hey, this bill was printed in the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. If you see an F, it was printed out in Atlanta. So something here, just a little bit more informational for you guys. Each Federal Reserve Bank issues currency, which is marked by a letter A to L corresponding to its location. And then finally here, the Federal Open Market Committee oversees open market operations, which is the main tool of monetary policy and where we will spend quite a bit of our time. So what are the ins and outs of open market operations, and how exactly is that going to detail monetary policy itself? So we'll go ahead and take a look at the three actually specific tools of monetary policy. It just doesn't include these open market operations. They also include other things that we need to go ahead and detail, but we want to go ahead and fall back on these open market operations because it is the most powerful tool and the most conventional tool in order for the Federal Reserve to increase or decrease the sort of reserves that we have within the U.S. banking system. So increasing and decreasing the money supply, if you want to simplify that just a little bit. So we'll go ahead and take a closer look at all the details of the tools of monetary policy in our next section.